What up, you lovable nerds? Fallout here, and yes, you are reading the title of today's video correctly. At the end of May, I went out of town. Didn't mention where to, but yeah, a lot of you probably suspected. I was invited out to Bungie to check out an early version of The Edge of Fate. This will be one of a few videos I plan on putting out this week covering secret footage I was allowed to record of the new content we'll be getting in July. Do me a big favor and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the other videos when they come out. My final video will be discussing my overall thoughts on Edge of Fate. Definitely don't want to miss that one. I have a lot to say, but today we're talking about exotics. While playtesting Edge of Fate, we were given access to several new exotics to tinker around with. 3 of them were exotic pieces of armor, 1 for each class, and 2 were exotic weapons. Why don't we start with armor first? The Titan exotic is not only hilarious, but gives Titans a long requested feature with some activation criteria. Introducing the Melas Panoplia gauntlets. Collecting a fire sprite or rapid solar final blows make you a forge master, allowing you to recall your throwing hammer. After impacting a target, recall your hammer at full intensity to perform a perfect recall, causing an explosion of forge slag. Perfect recalls and collecting fire sprites extend your time as a forge master. Translation. Step 1. First activate the forge master buff, which when it's ready, you'll notice in the bottom left-hand corner of your HUD. You activate it by either grabbing a fire sprite or by getting rapid solar blows, which IMO is way easier depending on the gun you got. Step 2. When forge master is on your HUD, the next time you chuck your hammer, the timer will activate, and now you basically turn into a fire-themed Thor. Throw your hammer, and if you hit the target, you'll cause an explosion of slag, and then hit the melee button again to recall your hammer, rinse, and repeat. While the hammer tracking seems to be ramped up in Forge Master mode, I'd say to make sure that you're still actually aiming, because if you're accurate and good at executing perfect recalls, i.e. pulling your hammer back at the exact right time, you'll extend your Forge Master timer. Whiffing your hammer throws is a feels bad moment though, and does not extend your timer, so yeah, you kinda have to act fast, but also be sure to be accurate to the best of your ability. I feel like this exotic is a not so sneaky way of the Bungie devs trying to find literally any way on God's green earth to convince the Titans out there to use anything other than prismatic consecration. The Panoplia gauntlets go well with both Roaring Flames and Soul Invictus. With the right build, you can generate sunspots and slowly ramp up the power of your throwing hammer. This also kind of solves a weird problem that Solar Titans have had where it genuinely just sucks having to physically run over and pick up your hammer, encouraging you to not throw it over long range. That whole problem partially led to that one really funny meta we had where Solar Titans would just repeatedly chuck their hammer at a target over and over at point blank range. It was just better and easier that way. While I wasn't able to fiddle with this exotic for as long as I would have liked, we were on a very tight schedule when recording footage, I will say that it scratched a certain itch I've had with the Titan throwing hammer for a really long time. I should mention though that at higher difficulty levels of play, it didn't really feel like I was doing a ton of damage. Granted, you can really crank up the difficulty knob in Edge of Fate to a laughably high degree. More on that later this week. So I shouldn't really be expecting to blow through every piece of content with simple hammer spam chucking, but yeah, don't expect this to be straight up fire right out of the gate without some pretty good build crafting on your part. When July is here and I get more time to actually fiddle around with these, I'd really like to do some detailed damage testing and see if they can stack up to the gold standard of Titan melee spam, Consecration Knockout Prismatic Titan with Spirit of Syntho armor. That little build package puts in a wild amount of work in PvE these days for very little effort, so while definitely fun, Panoplia really has its work cut out for it. Next up, we have the Eunoia Warlock gauntlets. I'm sure I'm saying that properly, and nobody will correct me ever. Hellion projectiles deal increased damage the further they travel, eventually fracturing into scorching shrapnel. TLDR, fellow floofing Warlock bros. Equip the Hellion aspect, either on Solar or Prismatic, and now your little Solar buddy will hit harder the further the projectile goes. I came home after my trip and recorded some footage of the current Hellion aspect, and whoops, I forgot.
Now that's a lot of damage!
Power level is getting shaken up drastically in Edge of Fate, more on that another day, and it definitely has a big effect on our damage numbers, so almost impossible to compare damage output when I was at Bungie with current damage output Hellion. The numbers are way too different. Here's some good news though, unless there's something else going on, and again, our recording sessions were kind of wacky, But it seems like with Eunoia, the extra projectiles from Hellion result in a faster ignition time. Here we are in current D2 against Karl the Cabal. With no other aspects or fragments, we can see it takes about 4 hits with Hellion for an ignition to be triggered. Now here we are in Edge of Fate in the shooting range, which is awesome by the way, against a yellow bar ogre. Hard to tell from the footage, but it seems like we get an ignition at either 2 or 3 hits from Eunoia Hellion rather than the usual 4. This is a really straightforward exotic. It reminds me of a slow cooker. By that, I mean it's something you don't really need to actively think about. Just turn it on and have it help you in the background while you get drunk and do your thing in the kitchen. I think this exotic might be a contender for some activities, but it's all going to depend on how much you're able to actually use it to stack up repeated ignitions, I think. If you're able to dish out ignitions way faster and to make the room explode way better, way faster, way harder, then yeah, I could see it being viable. More on that in July, I'm sure. And before we move on to weapons, exotic hunter armor. We got a chest piece called Moirai. Quick side note, there's no way that Bungie doesn't know what they're doing when they're naming these exotics, right? Like they're trying to confuse people, right? It doesn't matter. Anyway, the exotic trait is Web Catcher. Threaded Spike can bounce to tangles, detonate them, and return immediately. Tangles detonated by Threaded Spike are rewoven and retrieved by it. Catches without a tangle refund extra melee energy. I know it's a whole lot of info to take in, but I can summarize it in 2 words. Strand spam. Once you've managed to generate a tangle on the field, take your Threaded Spike melee and chuck it at the tangle. Mission complete. Not only will you detonate the tangle, but when your Threaded Spike melee returns, you'll now be holding a tangle. You've both detonated the one on the field and you've cloned a new one into your hands. That might not sound like a lot at first, but if you play a lot of Strand Hunter, I'm sure you're already starting to see the vision on what you can do with this exotic. The aspects that IMO were born to be paired with the Moirai armor are Whirling Maelstrom and Widow's Silk. Whirling Maelstrom because when you detonate the original tangle, it now becomes a Whirling Dervish of green destruction, and Widow's Silk so you have more grapple grenade energy. Remember, if you grapple to a tangle, you immediately recharge your grenade energy, and this works even if your grapple latches onto a Whirling Maelstrom, which you can then use to grapple melee spam. In short, you'll have even more Whirling Maelstroms on the field for free, which you can grapple to and spam more grapple melees. You basically just dial up the Strand Chaos to 11 with this exotic. The only partial downside is something I can demonstrate here. If you're not perfect with where you place your grapple grenade melee, then instead of locking onto your Whirling Maelstrom, the grenade will lock onto an enemy instead, in which case you would not insta-refresh your grenade energy. This mistake can happen very easily because, you know, Whirling Maelstroms aggressively target enemies and dig into them, meaning your 2 targets are basically right next to each other. It's a very fun gameplay loop for sure, but frustrating when you make a minor mistake. Any season or episode, whatever we're calling them now, where you get Strand heavy mods on the artifact will make this exotic go extra hard. It's really fun. All right, why don't we move on to weapons? Someone ring the bell because we got yet another exotic hand cannon out here. This is Graviton Spike. In short, this thing can fire either arc damage or stasis damage, which you can jump back and forth between whenever you feel like. The trait is Temporal Manipulation 4. Hold down the reload button to swap between fast firing arc mode or slow firing stasis mode. Final blows and precision hits overcharge the opposing mode to enable additional effects. Kinda confusing, but in a nutshell, it is like this. When you're in arc mode, the gun fires noticeably faster, 150 RPM to be exact, but the shots don't hit as hard. When you're in stasis mode, the gun basically fires like a 120 RPM hand cannon, harder hitting but slower firing. When you land crits or get final blows, you'll notice that you're building up charge meter in the bottom left-hand corner. When you feel like you want to take advantage of that meter, you'll swap firing modes and then start shooting. When stasis mode is overcharged, shots fired will create a stasis explosion and form crystals. And yes, you can use this to straight up slow and freeze targets directly, which is very handy. When arc mode is overcharged, shots fired will call down bolt charged lightning strikes on a hit. If you max your charge meter and then start spam firing, I believe you can unleash around 5 lightning strikes back to back to back to back to back, and it's really fun. I am definitely looking forward to some really wonky build crafting with it to see what it can really do with the right build. We didn't playtest a ton of PvP while we were there. Again, there was a lot to do with very little time, but I can only imagine that this might become an extremely interesting weapon in PvP depending on how fast you'll be able to fill up the meter. Keep that on the mental back burner for now. This could either become A, hard meta, or more likely B, a specialist weapon used by a select few individuals with the goal of just wanting to torture others in quick play with extreme shenanigans. The final exotic I have to show you is, believe it or not, a scout rifle, and even though it runs on primary ammo, it hits unbelievably hard. Introducing the third iteration, and it kinda does a lot. Triplanar Mass Driver fires a spread of void energy projectiles. Aiming down sights narrows the spread. That part is easy enough. Hip fire the scout rifle and you get a somewhat wide tri-shot spread, ADS to narrow the spread. Next, though, we have amalgamation rounds. ADSing for a short period without firing will compress the spread into a single high-density projectile. Damaging a target with this shot marks them. This weapon deals additional damage to marked targets. Defeating a marked target or landing a crit final blow with an amalgamation round grants invisibility and true sight. Alright, TLDR. Rather than ADSing and spamming shots like we normally do, third iteration wants you to wait for just a second when ADSing the gun. You'll see your crosshair condense, and when it finishes, then you fire. Your shot will do way more damage than it did before. Damaging the shooting range ogre, a regular shot does around 124 damage on a crit. Again, remember the damage numbers are going to be weird in my video. Power level is getting tweaked hardcore in Edge of Fate. When you hit with an amalgamation round, you do 481 damage, significantly higher. And remember, we've now marked the target. Hitting the marked target with another amalgamation round now takes the damage number up to 624. Basically, marking the target makes them take 30% more damage from amalgamation rounds, which hit way harder than firing the gun rapidly. So not only can you hit yellow bars really hard with third iteration, but you can use it to easily pick off red bars with big damage, which, remember, give you both invisibility and true sight if you get a final blow with a crit. It's kind of an all-purpose exotic primary weapon in PvE. Strong damage output, good utility, and it runs on primary ammo. The final perk on the gun is modified heatsink. Battery slowly recharges over time when the weapon is stowed or not being fired. In short, if you're not shooting the gun, it'll very slowly auto-reload over time, which is kinda nice. But don't worry, if you want to traditionally reload the gun, you can. Hit the reload button and you'll vent the core, aka just reload the gun. Anyway, you know those moments in a raid or dungeon where you're out of bait and switch rocket launcher ammo, but DPS phase is still going, and you're just trying to hit the boss with whatever backup DPS you got left? Third iteration will likely go hard in those moments, and I feel like a lot of people are going to really enjoy using the gun in PvE. I'm definitely going to give it a try in PvP as well. I'm extremely tempted by both free invisibility and true sight. However, I don't know if I'll wind up being patient enough to pop off with this exotic in PvP. Remember, you have to actually wait while ADSing and let the scope tighten before being able to fire an amalgamation round, and I'm not sure I'll be patient enough for that in PvP. We'll see how it plays out when the time comes. Again, do me a favor, subscribe if you haven't already, and ring the notification bell. I have more videos coming out this week featuring a taste of what we'll be getting in Edge of Fate. There is much to talk about. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.